What's up, and welcome back to Nowstalgia Pod, giving you your decade wrap up in music today. I'm joined by my trusty co-host, Dave Martin Swagger. Dave, how are you feeling about your album of the year and song of the year lists?
Feeling great, man. A lot of tough decisions to make regarding both lists. Obviously, looking at 10 whole years of music, all genres. It's you could go about this any number of ways, and I'm sure we both went at it a little differently. But yeah, feel good. I think I like what the lists say. And I think that's the most important thing: is you got to have a reason for making a list in the first place.
Yeah, it's well, we're going to jump in a second about how we went about our list. I have never really felt great about the music list at the end of the year, just because there's so much to pick through, and it's hard to compare. Like
I've
you
never
said,
heard everything.
genres, right? Um, and I usually go about these. I make my initial list, then I'll kind of comb through like some expert lists, or some people that I like their opinions and see what they have. And man, it was all over the place because music is, I think, unlike movies or TV, one of even more subjective. It's just kind of what hits each person. And we've talked about how sometimes we recognize things are good, but we just can't get past the person's voice or the style of music. So it's hard to, I think, factor in the objectivity into these
Mhm.
lists as much as maybe something like movies or TV. But if you want to check out our best of the decade movies and TV lists, go to our YouTube page, youtube.com/nostalgiapod, and also go to soundcloud.com/nostalgiapod and check out those lists and hit that subscribe button on YouTube, and give us some feedback on Twitter at nostalgiapod. So Dave, give me like a general idea, like what were you factoring in for your album of the year list?
Album of the decade, you mean?
Album of the decade,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, well, I guess it's kind of the same actually for both. But for album of the decade, I think since we're looking at a lot of times music that's several years old at this point, how the album stacks up in your brain today versus when you heard it or even just that year. So I think sometimes you're speaking to a moment in time that was really captured really accurately, but that moment also needs to, I think, be worth revisiting today. You know,
Mhm.
so even if it had significance in its 1 year, if that's maybe has been trumped by something later, you might want to put that further down the list. Depending on how long your list is, of course. But you know, I don't have any rock on my list actually, but that I think
Boo.
that kind of goes into I think the view of the past decade. It's like there's only a handful of genres I think anyone's really going to consider. It's going to be hip hop, it's going to be indie rock, it's going to be pop, and alternative versions of all those genres. I really don't think anything else is really being considered. Um, if you look at anyone else's list, the most popular, most notable rock albums, with a few exceptions, of course, are softer stuff. And I'm sure we're going to get to some of that soon. But it doesn't actually surprise me to confirm that I didn't choose any rock when I actually did it, just because thinking about where the decade has ended and my thoughts throughout the past decade, it's like, oh yeah, I think this list kind of captures the most important music that people make right now. So it's there's a lot to think about, though. I mean, was there anything else you really were factoring in?
Um, I think something you spoke to, maybe didn't name in this way, is just like the timelessness of the album. There is obviously always going to be um, some changes that you're going to hear just by the way music is made as it develops and progresses. But it's actually funny. I was looking through my list, and if I noticed that I was kind of lumping, and I'm not sure if that speaks to like times of my life or what, but like my albums came from a lot of the same years. So I had like a couple from 2010, a couple from 2015. and then maybe a couple that were sprinkled in different times. But it really felt like maybe those times of my life, something about the albums that came out then, or maybe it was just the level of greatness of that year. And I think there's something about reflecting on the music year and the strength of it. Like I was started to put together my end of year list for this year, 2019, and it feels just less exciting to me than last year in some ways. And maybe that's because something personally in my life or not, but I just always find that fascinating as well. But yeah, I mean, I think I probably went about it very similarly to you, and maybe we should jump into these lists. So we're going to go 10 to 1. I'll let you lead the way, Dave. Who do you got number 10?
Number 10 for me, bit of a vanity selection. Anderson .Paak, Malibu.
Good Lord.
Comes out at the beginning of 2016. Not an album I heard right away, but it did, of course, crack my list that year. And, just kind of, it's not his, Venice was the first big album from Andy, but I think Malibu was obviously the big breakout, the big critical breakout, big celebration of that kind of talent. And for me, to this day, it is still kind of like a perfect blend of like matching hip hop and soul and R&B, and kind of that awesome blend that is a lot more common today than it was even just a few years ago, And yeah, I don't think we don't need to harp on that much, but Anderson .Paak, super talented guy, and you kind of get a lot of that variety on this album. And I think now we come to expect it. Of course, there's been 2 more albums since this, but yeah, that kind of that genre blend that is now in vogue. This is probably one of, if not the best example of that in recent memory. So Anderson .Paak, Malibu.
Yeah, that's a great choice. It was on my honorable mention list, and just a really, really fun album. And there are so many like specific moments, whether it's the beginning of Come Down or how it was on so many, how there were songs from it on so many commercials that year. It felt like it really just stuck in people's zeitgeist. So number 10 for me, moving on, is Kacey Musgraves' Golden Hour.
Nice.
We talked about this last year, so I won't spend too much time getting into it, but you talked about that genre blending, and Kacey Musgraves, I guess, is traditionally known as a country star, but she really jumps around from pop to acoustic singer-songwriter type stuff on here, and even some dance in some of the songs. And this is also an album that just makes me feel a lot of things. Like it makes me feel sad, happy, kind of gets you into your emotions in a lot of different ways. And Kacey's just like a great artist, and you could probably ask 3 different people what their favorite Kacey Musgraves album, and you could get 3 different answers. But I think Golden Hour is kind of the epitome, and she won the Grammy for it. So it speaks to, I think, just how the industry also recognizes her rise to greatness. So number 10 for me, Kacey Musgraves, Golden Hour. Number 9 for you, David.
Number 9 for me is House of Balloons from The Weeknd.
This is an inspired fucking pick.
His first mixtape came out in 2011 and has since been put on streaming as part of the trilogy of his first 3 mixtapes, of course. And yeah, this is an inspired pick, but I think it's really important because this is pre-fame Weeknd. Again, this is the first thing anyone ever heard from him. We just had the Drake co-sign. We just knew he was in Toronto. You look back at those profiles at the time, and he was very poor, definitely struggling at the time when this came out. The big hair that he's already since left behind was about to come with this. But The Weeknd, when he comes out in 2011, you get this raw, coke-fueled, sex on the brain R&B that was really unlike anything else you ever heard. And the production was really important because it's this really cloudy, more lo-fi stuff, but still quite varied. There's a lot of synths on here. There's also lots of drums and stuff. And again, this is pre-pop. He's obviously since become quite a different artist, not necessarily for a bad thing, but just changed. But I think House of Balloons, you look back and listen to songs like The Morning or Wicked Games or The Party and the After Party. Yep. And you just remember that, like, this kind of rawness in R&B was just like really rare, and like actually like legitimately like actually saying like something with some candor. You know, like obviously we've had sex jams before in R&B and stuff. You know, like, but like I think there's just a lot more depth to this than say like Trey Songz, who was popping off at the time and stuff. So yeah, The Weeknd. I think this is kind of like the foundational piece for him, and yeah, a lot of
Yeah.
coke. A lot of coke has been done to this. A lot of sex has been had to this, and not stopping anytime soon.
Yeah, man. House of Balloons, Glass Tables is a song that every time it comes on, I'm just like, man, the fact that The Weeknd made this as like one of his first, like one of the first tracks off this is just like so unbelievable to me. It's such a good track. And the way it switches up right in the middle is just like, you feel like you're in like a black and white like movie or in, I don't know, just it's incredible. So, well, really, really awesome pick by you. Number 9 for me, the Alabama Shakes. And
Which one? The self-titled?
oh, sorry, no, Sound and Color. Sorry, 2015 Sound and Color. And man, Alabama Shakes. So, you know, they come out with the self-titled album, as you just mentioned, and you know, a song or two popped off of it, and people were like, you know, these guys, they're coming from the South, this Southern rock band, there's a lot to love here. There's potential that they could really be like the next thing, you know, boys and girls. In 2012, also, you know, popping off in that same way. But then 2015 comes around, and Sound and Color comes out, and you just kind of hear the ambitiousness of Brittany Howard and how she really establishes herself as this creative rock slash almost like Adele-like singer, you know, not obviously not to that same level, but just has this booming voice and this perspective that's so different and unique. And they kind of bring you on this like acoustic guitar driven space thriller of an album, jumping around from all different types of genres. And you know, it's all rock, but it's at some points acoustic, at some points really like heavy metal type stuff, and it's just a joy to listen to the whole way through. And I think this is one of the rock albums I come back to more than any other from this past decade. And I obviously listen to more rock than you do. But man, the way that Brittany Howard establishes herself here, and then you hear her on Jamie this year, it seems like she's just kind of skyrocketing and will be a voice in the rock field, kind of leading the way moving forward. You know, I'm looking through the song list as we're talking here, and I'm like, I don't really think there's a song on here I don't like, but if I had to pick one, probably Give Me All Your Love is like the centerpiece of this album. And I think if you, I didn't put this on my song of the decade list, but it's up there. It probably would be like top 20 for me. It's just amazing. So Alabama Shakes, Sound and Color, my number 9. Number 8 for you, Dave.
Rihanna, Anti, the last Rihanna album, which came out back in the beginning of 2016. Been quite a while now. I believe she dropped 3 records this decade.
Mm-hmm.
But this was like, you know, this one kind of marks a shift away from Def Jam, her acquiring her masters, kind of doing the Taylor Swift plan actually successfully several years beforehand. And yeah, that's fine with the Audacity. We have the Zoom back up.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, and the trade for Kluber is Delano Shields and Emmanuel Clace. Not a lot, but Clace is a big prospect. But
Clace on my team.
Relief
but
prospect.
I don't know what it's gonna.
Yeah, I mean, they're gonna trade Brad Hand. Then you'd be good.
Yeah, jeez. I mean, imagine at this point they're gonna blow it all up, but
yeah, for Jose.
Yeah. Anti.
Yeah. But I think Anti. This is actually funny because this is a record that I didn't love when I first heard it. It took a while to actually grow on me, and I think in general it just really grown in estimation. Like it's, I think, really widely celebrated at this point. But the freedom that Rihanna expresses here on her 8th album, you know, her 8th album before turning 30, well before turning 30, she had been such a product of the mainstream pop machine for so long and making lots of good music, of course. But this is her finally kind of expressing her creativity while also just making lots of bangers like she's wont to do. Kiss It Better, Needed Me, Live on the Brain, Sex with Me, and of course Work, which was,
Mhm.
maybe not the most eloquent song, especially the chorus anyway, but billions of views later, it's definitely resonated. So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think Rihanna's next album, whenever that might come out, it was one of my most anticipated albums for this year. Never came. She's so successful with like Fenty and stuff. Who knows if how much she's been in the studio? But this kind of representing like a new era in her career, and also kind of being a pretty unique, I think, for a pop album, just because nothing really takes a lot of the swings that this album does in terms of like vocal pop. Yeah, I think another one that I think has continued to rise in estimation since it's come out.
Yeah, really solid album. Good pick. Number 8 for me, an album I know that you like as well. Jamie XX In Color.
Nice.
That fall
Honorable
on your
mention
list?
for me.
Honorable mention. Yeah, Jamie XX. Especially because the XX were a band that a lot of people were very excited about beginning of the decade. Felt like they could really establish themselves, and then they kind of fell off. But the lesser known member of the trio, the DJ kind of backing all of it, comes in 2015 with this almost like an old school kind of throwback sounding album with so much like inventiveness at the same time. Like it sounded like a real like mixing type album. And if you actually see him live, he actually mixes live, which is really a pleasure to watch. But then there's just so many different pieces to it, like a song like Gosh that has this like worrying like repetitiveness to it, but then also brings in these like synths in the background at the end. It's like and like it really just kind of gives you this like spacey type feeling. And then you're just jumping around the track list. Obviously, like Loud Places featuring Romy from the XX is this like banger of a song about like being on this like higher plane with this person that you're with. I know there's gonna be good times. It's just an absolute like party jam. Like
Thugger.
Just makes it go. And it's just an album that really grips you from beginning to end. And I didn't have a lot of EDM on my song or album list, but this was one that was hard to leave off just because it's actually the only vinyl EDM album I own. So definitely love this one. I'm glad it was on your audible mentions. I know we both really liked it. Number 7.
Number 7 for me, an album we've talked about a lot just a few years ago, Melodrama from Lorde, 2017. Did this make your list?
My number 4.
Hell yes. Yeah. Melodrama, another pop album in like a loose sense, but it's Lorde documenting her sudden stardom at the age of 16 earlier in the decade, following royals and pure heroin, and being able to communicate that journey in, I think, a way that's really really relatable and easy to grasp for people that listen to this. I mean, no one really can relate to having sudden fame like that, but all the other struggles that she communicates on Melodrama in terms of like heartbreak and loss and just changing as a person, obviously is quite familiar to more people. And, along the way, you have a lot of bangers, once again, like Green Light and Perfect Places and Liability. And of course the Louvre, quite a songwriting masterclass. Lorde, another artist I think just continues to grow in her short career, and really excited for what's next. But yeah, Melodrama is something that's really stuck with me, and I think just really the magic is still there from 2 years later.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, this is the best breakup album of the decade by far. And track to track, the roller coaster ride you go on of, the idea of like kind of falling in love with somebody and then sobering up literally, and having like the relationship fall apart throughout the album. And Supercut, I think for me is the song I come back to most, because I feel like it really embodies that like feeling when you break up with somebody and you're remembering all these different emotions and feelings, and then to build off all these other things like Perfect Places as the closer is just perfection. Yeah, and for her to make an album like this at such a young age, she recently said that she was working on an album she was hoping to release at the end of this year, but she took some time off because her dog passed away. But I feel like she's really become a very like thoughtful and calculated artist who wants to drop quality things and not just drop things. You know, she comes on the scene with Royals at the beginning of the decade, and it feels like you're going to be hearing her every single year dropping banger after banger, and she really kind of pulls back and has thought about her craft a lot. And I think that's why I feel most impressed with this album is for her to be, I think she was in her early 20s when she drops this, and to show so much like wisdom and thoughtfulness is just like, I'm excited to see where Lorde can go with this. And also shout out Jack Antonoff, because this is one of the first albums you kind of see his excellent producer touch. So number 7 for me, Watch the Throne.
Oh,
Did this make your list?
Nope, it did not.
No. Yeah, Watch the Throne. 2011.
Yep.
Do you remember like your first time listening to this album?
No, honestly. I remember like Otis, listening to the singles and stuff. I don't actually remember much about listening to the whole album. And it's actually an album that I don't really care for the back half nearly as much as I do the beginning. And I also made a rule of not repeating artists for this list, so that's why I didn't pick this Kanye record. Spoilers. But yeah, I think the highs of Watch the Throne are still just as high today as they were 8 years ago.
And that's the thing is, I agree. I think the lows are very forgettable in this album, but like Ham, No Church in the Wild, Otis, yeah, that first half is just like pure cocaine into the bloodstream, and like you just want to like jump around and like party with all your friends. And the music videos I remember too, like watching them, like the Otis one when Jay-Z and Kanye just balling out, or you know, Edwards in Paris when they're kind of like on the stage, and then you have like the Will Ferrell drop in there.
Yeah,
just
iconic.
Like, yeah, absolutely iconic, and just the way it totally. And then that, you know, Frank singing on No Church in the Wild, kind of just like that is Frank, right? And I'm like questioning myself.
Yeah, that's him.
Just like, so there's so many moments on it, and I felt like it really identified or just continued this run of excellence for Kanye and Jay-Z. Kind of, you know, he has a probably a career-defining album at the end of the decade with 444, but he had a bit of a lull. So to like have this bump for him just felt also so like exciting. I guess I have a lot of affection for this at the time it came out too, because it was our time in college, and I remember a lot of like fun times in college partying for these songs. So Watch the Throne, number 7 for me.
You know, the thing about Watch the Throne too is ultimately I view it more as a Kanye album. Yeah, I think that the maximalism of Kanye is much more present on the album. You know, look no further than the cover, right? Cruel Summer, a year later, the Good Music album, same motif. But the chemistry that Jay-Z and Kanye showcase on the album, that only people that have worked together for, you know, almost 12 years at that point, like, I mean, it's really genuine. And also, you know, it's funny, like looking back, Who Gonna Stop Me towards the back end sample is Flux Pavilion's I Can't Stop, which was one of those like really big EDM songs of the decade that also kind of came and went. Like Flux Pavilion definitely came and went, but like that's another thing. Like, you know, the year later you get the I Don't Like Chief Keef remix on Cruel Summer. It's the same thing. It's like at that time, Kanye in the post-Dark Twisted Fantasy realm really was just in full command of, you know, who he was as an artist, you know, his new, or at least that new stage of who he was, you know? So yeah, Watch the Throne, I mean, the biggest event album until I think Beyoncé started to drop at the end of the decade.
Yeah.
You know? True moment.
Absolutely. Moving on to 6.
6 for me is Run the Jewels 2.
One of my honorable mentions. Good choice.
Yeah, so because I wanted to pick a Run the Jewels record, and settled on 2. I think 2 is the best one, not by much. I think they're all great. Really like 3, but RTJ2, I think just simply, he's like the level up to the level up. Like Killer Mike when he came out with rap music, right before RTJ1, that solo album. You're like, all right, yeah, Killer Mike still got it in his late period career, and like LP really reestablishes himself by producing most of that solo project. And then you get RTJ1, and they're like, wait, these guys are amazing together. LP still has it as a performer and as a producer of true double threat, and they're actually just saying things about the current climate that no one else is saying, let alone in a eloquent, musically pleasing fashion like this. And you get RTJ2, and it's just that times 10. Mm-hmm. So yeah, don't need to belabor the point, but I think Run the Jewels, in a sense, you can view all 3 albums as one piece and put them all in the spot. But yeah, I think 2 is kind of the crowning achievement thus far, and we know the 4th album's on the way.
Yeah, when we reviewed RTJ3, we kind of talked about how they might be one of the most underrated duos, which is still saying a lot because they do get a lot of shine. But man, for how consistent and how much quality they put out, and the fact that they aren't bigger is always kind of baffling to me. But yeah, you just run through this track list. I mean, Close Your Eyes and Count to Fuck, Blockbuster Night Part 1, Lie, Cheat, Steal. I mean, there's just banger after banger on here. Absolutely amazing album. And like you said, you can look at this all as a whole, but I think this one definitely rises above the other 2 for me as well. So excellent choice. Number 6, an album we talked about a lot last year, Dirty Computer from Janelle Monáe. That make your list?
Nice. Did not. Honorable mention. Excellent choice.
You can check out our breakout for it to get our longer thoughts, but this is Janelle Monáe being Prince, basically, and it's excellent. And we talked about runs on albums of songs, and from Screwed through Make Me Feel, it's just maybe the best 4-song run on any album of the decade. Pink is one of the most infectious pop songs. It's also disguised as like a female empowerment song. I guess not even really disguised, just is a female empowerment song.
Sex positive.
And you got Brian Wilson from the Beach Boys on the first track, and you got a lot of really funky and fun production on here, while also being a culturally a cultural critique of the time, I would say, on a lot of other parts of the album. And it really feels like Janelle Monáe, who had a good decade music-wise, from the time she kind of broke out on the scene thanks to Big Boy to this album. Yeah. But this feels like she's starting to reach just like her full potential, and it's so exciting. You said this was an honorable mention for you?
Yeah. Was my number 2 last year. I think it's an album that you can jump in and really enjoy a lot of the moments just from like a pure song standpoint, and you don't have to think too deep if you don't want to. Like a song like Screwed, that's my favorite song on the album, with Zoe Kravitz. That's just really fun song on its own, but also has a really, I think, wonderful message that fits the rest of the album. So it was cool to see this get recognized with a Album of the Year nomination, because like Janelle has never been a major mover of album units,
right,
despite all the acclaim. So it was cool. I think the coronation really happened last year, and that was a lot of fun. But yeah, the Dirty Computer is wonderful.
Great album. Number 5.
Number 5 for me is number 5 for me. Where is it? Acid Rap, Chance the Rapper. Album, not an album. It is a mixtape. His second mixtape. Pitchfork had it on their list, so we're gonna go with it. This was one of the first things that came to me when I was like, I need to make the list. What should I pick? This comes out spring of 2013. I think it's the mixtape of the decade, and like in a fucking walk, just because in terms of the influence, replayability of it all. But this is where Chance becomes the star that he is now. But like he earned that by kind of just reinventing what Chicago rap is. This comes out at like right at the peak of drill music. Like Chief Keef and Lil Reese and Fredo, Santana, they're all making Chicago drill at the time. And people getting gunned down and stuff. And then you get this whole other side of Chicago where like Chance is so cool with those dudes and gets that so struggle. It's the same thing for him. Yet inspiring all this jazz fusion music into his stuff while also making something that's so obviously indebted to being high. I think the musical legacy is really important. But I just look back and it's like this was the Chance project. Like I had been up on the blogs and like listening to Chance for a little bit before it came out. So I remember when this came out and just like texting people. It's like, listen to this shit. And like you think about earlier this year, it finally got to streaming, got to Spotify and stuff, and it charted in the top 5 just by the sheer enjoyment to have that album readily accessible to people that are just prefer to use streaming. It's in a sense, I'd say it's probably the master work of Chance. Creatively, it's hard to get back to that headspace. He's obviously a much different person now. No one ever used that as a negative against him, but I think acid rap really a one of one, and also paved the way for this whole new Chicago sound with, he gave looks to No Name on this, who's since continued that legacy. And of course, the people like Saba and Vic Mensa, that whole Chicago scene is really quite vibrant at this point, but this is why. So yeah, acid rap number 5 for me.
Yeah, it's a really strong mixtape, but even if it was like an album, like deserved to be on any album of the decade list, and I think you spoke to it well. And yeah, just a lot of songs on here I like. Smoke Again, probably my favorite, but yeah. Like you said, Action Bronson, Childish Gambino on this, No Name, Vic Mensa, like it's Saba. It's, really, really strong feature list on here. So number 5 for me, Twista. Yeah. Which wow, when was the last time I heard the Twisted track? Been a while. Anyways, number 5 for me, LCD Soundsystem's This Is Happening.
I knew this was coming.
Yeah, you knew I was going to vamp on LCD for a little bit.
That was easy. Easy call.
Yeah, and when I originally made this list, I had this album up a little bit higher. I think what moved it down for me is there are a couple of tracks that I don't necessarily love as much as some the albums above it, which I would say are pretty much flawless albums for me. I think I only have 3 more after this that haven't been talked about yet. And LCD Soundsystem. So at the time when this is released in 2010, James Murphy's kind of saying, I'm done as LCD. I don't want to keep making records anymore. I want to get out before, we become like washed or we aren't good, that sort of thing. And he does like the whole farewell tour where he like has like the burial on stage, or like the casket on stage at the last concert. It's very dramatic type stuff. But this album starts off with Dance Yourself Clean, which I think I'll be talking about on another list later on, which is just the epitome of like New York dance rock, in a way. Like it feels like a very like Talking Heads type song, maybe with a little bit more edge. And then it kind of goes through all these different types of emotions and experiences that you have either with your friends, with your lovers, or with just random people you meet on any dance floor in New York City when you're on a lot of drugs. And it kind of wraps
you could speak well to that, I imagine.
Oh, well, me, a party animal out there in New York City. But it wraps up with Home, which is this really like sweet track. And they usually have really solid closers on LCD albums, but this feels like such a exclamation point on what people thought was LCD at this time. And this album, I think, felt like a good wrapping up point. I'm glad they're back. LCD is probably my favorite live band by far. But this album, if this had been their last, I think would have been a great way to end it. Highlight of this album for me, other than Dance Yourself Clean, is I Can Change, which is seriously like one of the most dancey songs about like begging someone to like stay with you. So definitely recommend checking out This Is Happening, and just checking out all of LCD's work. Quality band. All right, Dave, number 4 for you.
Number 4 for me is Lemonade by Beyonce, which came
Honorable
out
mention
in
for me.
2016. I feel like I'm not the biggest Beyonce fan, but felt kind of blasphemous to not pick one of her albums from this year just because of the sheer impact that they all had while being great. You'll see a lot of her self-titled 2013 album on lists as well, even some love for 4 from 2011.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Lemonade for me is the go-to just because this was remember this was just Untitled, right?
Yeah,
like,
we got Tidal to listen to this.
She references it on the Carter's album from last year. If I gave a fuck about streaming numbers, I would have put that shit on Spotify. Fuck you or whatever, right? Like, it was truly a big flex to have this surprise drop after she had just surprise dropped the last album, and then make you have to pay extra for it by getting streaming service that you don't have or had no reason to get. Again, truly a moment in time, the whole Tidal exclusivity windows and all, of course, with Pablo and stuff later. But Lemonade, it's like it's not just a teardown of Jay-Z. It's like the healing moment too, right? Like it's kind of everything all at once. And like most good Beyonce records and Beyonce songs, it really resonates with her fans. And I also have tremendous love for this album for prompting Jay-Z to create 444, an album I also adore. So, yeah, I mean, I think people know the Beyonce thing at this point. Don't need to belabor the point, but in terms of sheer impact and sheer influence, this is top 3 easily in terms of just what Lemonade accomplished, and only a handful of artists even attempted to make a work like this since then. So number 4 for me.
Yeah, it was hard for me to put this album up there. Again, and I'm not the biggest Beyonce fan either. I recognize the impact it had, and there are a lot of tracks on this album I like, but I think if I were to re-listen, I would find myself skipping more than I probably would for most other albums, so it's hard to put up there. But yeah, the impact culturally is hard to deny, for sure. So that was your number 4? Give me your number 3, because my number 4 was Melodrama by Lorde.
That's right. Number 3 for me is Blonde by Frank Ocean.
Good one.
I made a rule, only wanted to pick one per artist. And, for a while I had Channel Orange here. The foundational Frank Ocean breakout in 2012. But I just think Blonde's actually just a stronger album. And we remember at the time, that was 2016, the anticipation for the next Frank album. There's either been teases, right? And then you have the big flex where he drops Endless, visual album. That's quite good. And he does that to get out of his contract with, I believe it was Def Jam. And he immediately sells Blonde to Apple Music, exclusive at the time. Again, exclusivity windows were still in vogue at the time. But
what a time.
Yeah. And it's funny, like there's some people that like almost like off hand wave Blonde in a certain sense for not quite understanding what Frank is going for. And I've seen the other side of that where people are like, it seems that the only people that get Blonde are the gays and the LGBT people, of course. But I mean, I still get it. I think Blonde is kind of Frank in full command of, just all like the pathos that is his songwriting and stuff. There's so many moments on this Ivy Nikes, pink and white. I mean, Jesus Christ. make love to Pink and White once, and like you'll never be the same. Like Frank is definitely one of the top artists of the decade, you know, in terms of having a full. I mean, heck, Nostalgia Ultra came out this decade too. Like having a full, having everyone acknowledge you for the first time this decade, and then totally reaching the stratosphere of what you do in the same time frame. You know, like he's right there at the top. But I think Blonde just is just kind of like his peak, and you know, I think some of the singles we've gotten since then, you know, songs like Biking or more recently Chanel, In the Room. Frank seems to be loosening up a little bit. Maybe have a little more fun. Maybe not trying to get truly as granular and as emotional as he has in the past. And you know, if he wants to have a little more fun, I'm cool with that, because I think between Channel Orange and Blonde, we've been given so much. So yeah, number 3.
Great pick. I'm not as well versed in Frank as you are, so it felt difficult to have him on the list, but I recognize the impact he's had. And I think the thing I admire most about him is that as like just a public figure, he's so mysterious. You know, he has this like aura about him. Remember when his most recent album, I'm forgetting the name, but when that was coming out, there was like leaks that he was holding these like listening parties in these single rooms in New York City, and people were trying to like just get like little recordings like put out. It's kind of amazing the impact he's had. And yeah, very interesting artist, and an interesting artist of the decade if that were to be the case. But my number 3, I'm guessing you're gonna have this a little bit higher than me. To Pimp a Butterfly by Kendrick Lamar.
2 for me.
I figured it was close. Yeah, so To Pimp a Butterfly, the reason it fell to 3 for me, I felt wrong having it anywhere outside like my top 4, because like I said, these albums are pretty undeniably perfect albums in my opinion. And when you look through To Pimp a Butterfly, you know, coming off Good Kid, Mad City, you really saw that Kendrick has every tool you'd want from someone that could be the greatest rapper alive. Lyrical ability, inventiveness in terms of beat and artistic direction, and then you mix that in with meaningfulness, and you're kind of left with this artist who you feel like could be the artist of a generation in a way. And this really was like his him transcending to like another plane when he was already like a top 3 or 4 rapper alive. And I think establishing himself as a number 1, because Pimp Butterfly, not only does it have such a significant cultural I'm going back to critique, but just like it magnifies, I think, the things that minority people go through, especially the Black community go through. But it does it in a way that is heartbreaking and uplifting and inspiring and devastating in so many different ways. And not only does Kendrick, I think, create an album that has bangers on it, but also an album that you look back on and you're like, this is a meaningful album, and it's all tied together with the poetry on it, you know, from, you know, verse to verse on it. And just really impressive the way he crafted this all together. Tell me what made this your number 2.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said there. Pimp Butterfly is Black music for Black people, and Kendrick is kind of the perfect person to make that kind of music and actually make that message for his community. And you think of the people he collaborated with on this, people like Thundercat and Kamasi Washington, right? And heck, even like big flexes like George Clinton. You know, it's everything is so precise in how he wants to make this jazz and soul inspired rap album, but also he's speaking to his community in a variety of ways. You have like the sheer anger with a song like The Blacker the Berry, and then you have more like triumphant songs like All Right, songs that you can listen to on their own and really enjoy, but also appreciate as part of the bigger message, of course. And then you have something like King Kunta, again, something that's incredibly black from a sonic perspective, but also is really enjoyable just on its own. It's gonna be hard to see something come out again that can kind of match the ambition that this album showcased when it came out in 2015. Like Kendrick Lamar's Damn, honorable mention, great record, but that's just, I think, smaller in scope overall. It's more about Kendrick personally, again, like Good Kid. But Tim Butterfly is kind of just the statement about Black people's place in the world at that time, and still very, very resonant today. It's you could talk about this album for hours. I'd recommend the Dissect podcast about this if you want to get really in depth. But yeah, I mean, Kendrick Lamar has been the top of the game for the past 7 years or so, and until someone can make something as instant classic worthy as this, he's not leaving the pedestal.
I'm not leaving. So that was your number 2. My number 2, Vampire Weeknd, Modern Vampires of the City, 2014.
Also an easy lock for the bettors at home.
Yes. I talked quite a bit about it when we were talking about Vampire Weeknd's newer album from this year, which, spoiler alert, will be on my end of 2019 best music list as well. But Modern Vampires of the City, Vampire Weeknd up to this point was this upper class punk rock band that infused,
punk rock?
Punk pop rock, I guess. It's interesting because there are elements of punk on there. It's like it's Oxford punk. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, they're too waspy for that, though.
Yeah, waspy is a good word. But they infuse so many other types of genres and elements from different parts of the world. And on this album, not only I think is this Ezra's best songwriting of his career, but it's also, I think, when you hear them starting to take some chances, and I think that's mostly because of Rostam, and the way that he was able to kind of help Ezra really hone the direction that they wanted to go in, and talk about love and talk about relationships while also kind of talking about just having fun at a party, dying young, enjoying the night, but doing it in a way that feels so very Vampire Weeknd tight. The instrumentals are great, and it's unique. For those who maybe don't like the softness of Vampire Weeknd, and that's been a lot of the feedback I've gotten from people like you and some of our listeners. Seeing them live, I think, will help you kind of understand a little bit more their greatness. And sure, that might not speak much to Album of the Decade, but I think it's undeniable to say that Modern Vampire of the City is a expertly crafted, written, and produced album. So my number 2, and only behind, I think, our shared number 1, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy.
Oh no, I actually picked the 1975. Sorry,
I figured that would. I thought that would crack a list somewhere. I think we're still going to hear from them. I'm guessing from you, but yeah, Kanye West, My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. Dave, why 2010? I mean, this was summer 2010, beginning of the decade, and you think that this has remained the best album of the decade?
Yeah, I mean, I would not quibble with people that put To a Butterfly above this at all. They're very different, and but I think My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, we've said this a lot as it being the best Kanye album, but it's certainly the best of this new period Kanye, post the Taylor Swift moment, when he really just started to lean in to who he felt he really is, just being someone who's very vain and I said maximalist before, but I think it really fits just in terms of all of the Kanye in bold capital letters. What does that mean? And he's always been the tinkering genius, but the legend of how this album was made in Hawaii with all of these legendary sessions is pretty famous at this point. But you have all these collaborators, and you think of like those stories of how like All of the Lights has background vocals from like fucking 50 people.
Elton John, Rihanna, like
a million people. Ellie
Yeah.
Jackson from fucking LaRue. It's like this
Mhm.
whole motley crew, Fergie, whoever, right?
Yeah.
Like there's so many people. And it's like that's the kind of thing that only Kanye would do,
Mhm.
because it's the stuff that he actually hears and like cares about, right? But you just go through this track list, and with the exception of this one song that I just really do not enjoy on this, and that would be Blame Game. But
Oh,
yeah, I don't like Blame
is
Game.
it the outro?
It's the whole thing, really. I don't like it at all. But other than that, like I used to not like So Appalled as much. Now I actually quite like that as well. This album raised the profile of Bon Iver in a huge way. But I think just overall, you can again pick moments on this because there's just so many bangers. Perhaps the greatest Kanye song of all, Runaway. You could certainly make that case is here. You have the reintroduction of Pusha T as Kanye's right-hand man, solo Pusha, starting in earnest right at this time. But yeah, I think this is just Kanye at his peak, in most command of his creative powers, which is a quite varied and vast skill set. So yeah, Dark Twisted Fantasy, it's just it's also filled with bangers. And we also have the not introduction, but I think the flag waving for Nicki Minaj as being one of the elite rappers with her scene stealing verse on Monster, where she kills Ross, Jay-Z, and Kanye on a song that they all share. So there's so much to like, and I think it all really still holds up today, like it just came out.
There is so much to like, and I think you spoke to it really well. But it's kind of funny because I look back and I think Devil in a New Dress might be the best Rick Ross song of the decade. Monster might be the best Nicki song of the decade. Runaway might be the best Kanye song of the decade, and possibly even the best like Pusha feature of the decade. And there's been a lot of good Pusha features of the decade.
Sure.
This is just like everybody firing on all cylinders. And so much talent worked on this, like you talked about. Even on Blame Game, like sure, maybe it's not everybody's favorite song, but John Legend sounds fantastic on that song,
right? And you got Rhea on there.
Yeah, Lost in the World. You talk about raising Bon Iver's profile. I think he kills it in Lost in the World. And then it leads into what I think is an awesome ending, a spoken word ending on Who Will Survive in America, really like exclamating this album. Sure. That, I'm talking about the back half of the album starts off with this incredible run. I talked about Janelle Monáe earlier. It's only rivaled, I think, by this album for me in terms of songs: Dark Fantasy, Gorgeous, Power, All of the Lights, and Monster all in a row. Like just those 5 songs could be any artist's like best song, and they were 5 in a row on a Kanye album. Just unbelievable.
Yeah. Dark Fantasy is my favorite intro track of all time. Just true immaculate banger. And then Gorgeous, Kanye is going bar for bar with Raekwon, who's bringing it.
Yeah.
It's fucking,
and you got Cudi on the hook on that, and Cudi sounds unbelievable on Gorgeous. Just so good. Easily my album of the decade. I agree. I think there's other albums that could have been up there. To Pimp a Butterfly, to me, obviously, I would also maybe say Modern Vampire of the City for those true rock heads who don't put the rap up there. But this list started with My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy for me.
Very easy.
Any albums you want to shout out, honorable mention?
You're going to see a lot of Daft Punk, Random Access Memories. Was that something you would consider? Nothing. I never really loved it, but a lot of people did.
I didn't love the album, but I think we might be talking about one of those songs on my songs for the decade list.
What about Arctic Monkeys AM?
It was like a back end honorable mention.
Gotcha.
Good album.
Yeah, I think in terms of like harder rock sound, that's probably the most important rock album of the decade, because that was actually something that was able to cross over into mainstream, pop radio,
absolutely,
while still being truly rock music. Everything else since then is, pop music first, then little rock, right? So almost a antique in a certain sense. Also want to shout out Live Love ASAP Rocky's debut mixtape from 2011. Also really helped shepherd in a new era of hip hop, new era for New York rap because it took influence from all other parts of the country. A really important album. You'll see a lot of love for the Robin albums, Body Talk at the beginning of the decade, Honey last year, Solange, A Seat at the Table, honorable mention for me, SZA's Control. You'll see some love for Grimes on other people's lists. I guess we should mention Adele, dropped 2 very well-liked albums this decade, 21, 25. I think Tierra Whack World deserves just a commendation just for the sheer audacity of the album construction.
Yep.
Very excited to see what we have next from her. And then lastly, just I think Drake released, I mean, this has been in the decade of Drake, right? But Take Care is widely celebrated as his best album. It still does hold up and was a true leveling up at the time. But I think if you're reading this, it's too late. That was Drake at his most celebratory, most victory lappy. And I've been revisiting that a lot. The retail mixtape as he sold at the time still holds up as well. Oh, and a shout out to James Blake, Overgrown.
Yeah, you got to a lot of the ones I was going to mention. Coloring Book, I think, is also up there for me. Really enjoyed that album, or mixtape, however you want to put it. And then I was thinking, if you had to pick a Taylor album from this decade, would you go Red or 1989?
Red.
Yeah.
More hits.
I agree. And I think even the ones that aren't hits are more solid. But
also, we have the final Tribe Called Quest album. We got it from Here. Thanks for Your Service in 2016. Really great, kind of out of nowhere project, in the wake of Phife Dawg's death. Also, the Jai Paul album, Leak Whatever Bait Ones, officially came out this year, but leaked several years ago. Not everything works on that album, but it's just really, really cool for I think what it represented at the time. Yeah, a lot of great shit. You mentioned Jamie XX. That was a big one for me. I mentioned any of the Tame Impala albums come up for you?
Currents, I guess, maybe, but it's hard. When I think of Tame Impala, for some reason, I don't necessarily think about their albums. Lonerism, was that 2010, I believe? Lonerism would be the one that I go back to most album-wise. Trying to see here when that came out. Yeah, that was 2012. Yeah. So yeah, that would be maybe back in honorable mention as well. Trying to think if I had any others. Oh, I really enjoyed Spoon's not most recent album.
Hot Thoughts.
Yeah, not Hot Thoughts. They Want My Soul from 2014. But we'll be talking about some of the albums that might have been honorable mention, I think, on the songs list. Any last thoughts about albums of the decade?
Like I said, I was only picking one artist, so I didn't pick Yeezus. Yeezus certainly is worthy to me. I think Yeezus gets better with age. It's really good. I also really like Pablo. I know you do too. Yeah. Good Kid, Mad City.
I was gonna say,
Channel Orange from Frank. You can make a case that your top 10 is like Kendrick, Kanye, and Frank, and there's like 2 other people in it. Like you could easily sell that list if you wanted to. But yeah, I think now it's like we're in such a singles driven industry at this point. We're talking about songs in a second, but like songs are what people promote. Sometimes the album is just a compilation of previous release singles. A lot of new artists do that way, work that way at this point. You even seen rock, right? Like the Black Midi dudes released several singles before Schlagenheim ever came out. And the lines have blurred over what is a mixtape, what is an EP, what is an album. I think younger people don't really know the distinction at all because in the grand scheme of things, you're consuming all of them in the same exact way. The old vinyl definitions don't really apply anymore to megabytes, you know? And with everything blurred, I do appreciate when artists try and set those expectations. Like Drake calling, if you're reading this, a retail mixtape. You could just call it a mixtape. Like now mixtapes all are cleared so they can be on streaming. That's just the way it is, right? The old school mixtape is dead. But even if you just think about like pop and stuff, it's like someone like Charlie XCX who releases all kinds of music before she ever really considers releasing it all together. Just seeing how the lines have blurred as streaming has become the dominant force in the industry has been interesting to watch. So I'm curious to see what kind of changes would be next. I feel like we've already seen so much change I'm not sure what's next, but yeah, looking forward to
Yeah.
what's next,
Yeah.
whatever it might be.
The decade really highlighted the move from hard copy to electronic, which is good and bad, and we'll be interested to see what's next, but we'll definitely be talking about it, so stay tuned. So why don't we wrap up there for album and tune back in for our video on songs of the decade.